What if the saints weren't just people from the past, but guides for how to live right now, in 2025? What if holiness didn't require a halo, a monastery, or a miracle, but just a series of small, intentional choices? And what if trying to live like a saint, even for 1 week, could begin to change everything about the way you see your life? That's what I decided to find out. I wasn't looking for a dramatic spiritual overhaul. Honestly, I wasn't even expecting anything profound. It started as a kind of personal challenge. What would happen if I tried to live for just 1 week, like the saints I grew up admiring? Not vaguely, not with vague inspiration, but practically, intentionally. I chose 3 saints as guides: Saint Francis of Assisi, for his radical simplicity and humility, Saint Thérèse of Lisieux, for her belief in small acts done with great love, and Saint Ignatius of Loyola, for his deep focus on awareness and inner transformation. I called it my Saint Week. The first thing I noticed was how loud my life was. On the first morning, I turned off my alarm and resisted the immediate urge to scroll. I sat in silence, trying to pray. My thoughts bounced around like pinballs: email, errands, anxiety. But I stayed. I didn't try to force deep prayer. I just made space. That space alone was new. Then came the real test: traffic. I was late, someone cut me off. Normally I'd react, tight jaw, snappy words under my breath, but I remembered what I had read the night before from Saint Thérèse: bear everything quietly, even joyfully. I said a Hail Mary instead. I didn't feel holy. I felt fake. But something surprising happened. I didn't carry the frustration with me all day. I actually let it go. That was new too. At work, I tried to live slower. I listened more than I spoke. I bit my tongue when gossip surfaced. I asked people how they were, and actually waited for their answer. When a coworker needed help with something small, I said yes without calculating what it would cost me in time. That day, nothing huge happened, but my heart felt less cluttered. The usual swirl of inner dialogue, ego, worry, defensiveness, was a little quieter. Not gone, just quieter. In the evening, instead of zoning out in front of a screen, I called a friend who had been struggling. I didn't record it, post about it, or expect anything from it. I just listened. That one choice made me realize how rare it is for us to give time without needing something in return. I also began to notice how deeply I'm attached to comfort. Saints didn't chase comfort. They chased meaning. That's why I skipped a meal one day, not for punishment, but to understand fasting. I gave away something I loved. I forgave someone who didn't ask for forgiveness. And every one of those actions, though uncomfortable, felt like they opened space in me that had been tightly held for too long. What grounded all of it was prayer. Not long, dramatic prayers. Just short, constant conversation. God, guide me. God, help me not rush this. God, remind me I'm not the center. I didn't hear voices, no thunderclaps or tears, but I felt nudged, centered, corrected. That first day was both underwhelming and strangely powerful. Holiness didn't feel like fire, it felt like focus. And the next day, it got harder. Not because I was doing more, but because the world pushed back. I tried to be fully present in meetings. I tried to make eye contact, to stay calm. By 10 a.m. I was already tired. Slowing down takes more energy than going fast. Being patient costs more than just responding out of habit. But the peace it gave me afterward, worth it. That night I wrote, "This isn't about being good, it's about being awake." And I think that's what set the saints apart. Not perfection, awareness. They saw every person as sacred, every moment as an invitation. They weren't rushing to accomplish holiness. They lived it in the interruptions. I knew this experiment wouldn't make me a saint, but after just 48 hours, I could already feel a shift, not in what I was doing, but in how I was being. I wasn't constantly checking my phone. I wasn't multitasking every moment. I was making choices rooted in something deeper than productivity or performance. And others noticed. A coworker asked me if I was okay. "You seem weirdly peaceful," she said. I smiled. "Trying something new," I told her. She wouldn't have guessed what it was. But the fruit of it? It showed. There's a myth that saints were born with a different kind of DNA, immune to stress, to anger, to pettiness. But what I was learning slowly was that sainthood doesn't remove your humanity. It just reorders it. The things I normally react to, annoying emails, petty conversations, boredom, still happened. But I had more space to choose a better response. Not always. Not perfectly, but more often. By the end of day 3, I felt tired, but not like burnout tired. More like I had just cleaned a cluttered room in my soul. I was aware of how often I speak when I should listen, how often I grab for my phone when I'm uncomfortable, how quickly I make things about me. The saints knew that too. That's why they prayed, why they fasted, why they built rhythms into their day that reminded them this life isn't about me, it's about love. And that's what I was starting to remember too, that love doesn't always look like big gestures. Sometimes it looks like showing up, saying the kind word, washing the dishes without being asked, putting the phone down, offering the parking spot. This wasn't a perfect week. I still messed up. I still got annoyed. I still forgot. But something had started to change, and I didn't want to go back. By day 4, I started to realize that living like a saint wasn't about doing more. It was about doing the same things, but with a different heart. That shift was subtle, but it felt massive. Everything I did, making breakfast, commuting, replying to emails, was still there. But I wasn't rushing through it. I wasn't treating people like obstacles or treating prayer like a checkbox. I was living slower, more present, and weirdly, more alive. That morning, I remembered something from the life of Saint Ignatius of Loyola. Find God in all things. It sounded poetic when I first heard it. Now it felt revolutionary. What if I actually lived my whole day with that in mind? What if, instead of compartmentalizing God to morning prayers or church on Sunday, I invited him into everything, into the ordinary? So I tried. As I poured my coffee, I whispered thank you. As I replied to a difficult email, I prayed for the person on the other end. As I passed a stranger on the sidewalk, I offered a silent blessing. These weren't dramatic spiritual moments, but they began to form a thread, a kind of unseen connection between the divine and the daily. And in that space, I felt something else I hadn't expected: freedom. Not freedom from responsibility, but freedom from the constant pressure to perform, to prove myself, to achieve. The saints didn't live in search of validation. They lived in response to grace. That's what I was trying to do. And it was changing the way I approached everything, even the hard parts. I had a meeting that afternoon that I was dreading. A conflict had been simmering between me and a co-worker for weeks. Normally, I would have walked in with my defenses up, ready to win. But instead, I remembered St. Francis's radical humility. I paused before the meeting and prayed, God, help me listen more than I speak. That prayer softened me. I still spoke up. I still shared what I needed to. But I wasn't combative. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was trying to love, even when it was uncomfortable. And that's something I never realized until I tried this challenge. Holiness isn't about being liked. It's about being loving. And sometimes that means speaking hard truths, but with gentleness. Sometimes it means letting go of the need to be right, just so peace can grow. Later that night, I read a reflection from Saint Thérèse of Lisieux that hit me hard. If every tiny flower wanted to be a rose, spring would lose its loveliness. It reminded me that sainthood isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming fully yourself, but in grace. That changed how I prayed. I stopped asking God to make me like the saints and started asking him to help me become the saint I was created to be. That shift deepened the entire experience. I started to examine my intentions more closely. Was I being kind just to feel good about myself? Was I seeking silence to escape others or to truly be with God? Was I fasting from distractions or just being rigid? The saints weren't spiritual perfectionists. They were humble enough to be honest. That's what I was learning. I didn't need to do this perfectly. I just needed to keep showing up. On day 5, I went for a walk at sunrise. No podcast, no playlist, just stillness. And as the sky shifted from deep purple to gold, I felt the weight of everything I'd been learning settle into my chest. Not heavy, but grounded. I had been chasing peace for years, reading about it, listening to talks, longing for it. And now here it was, not because I had achieved something, but because I had surrendered. Living like a saint, even just trying to, wasn't about becoming more religious. It was about becoming more real. I had never felt so human, so present, so rooted in my body, in my thoughts, in my time. That morning I thanked God not for something big, but for the quiet grace of being here. I wasn't just surviving my life anymore. I was living it. By day 6, something deeper began to settle in. Not a new habit, not a checklist, but an awareness. Living like a saint wasn't just shifting what I did, It was reshaping who I was becoming. I started to notice how I responded to people, not just when it was easy, but especially when it wasn't. The people I normally overlooked, the moments I usually rushed through, even the parts of myself I avoided, suddenly they felt like sacred ground. That morning, I woke up tired, not spiritually inspired, not brimming with grace, just human. My first instinct was to revert, snooze the alarm, skip prayer, grab my phone. But I remembered something from Saint Thérèse of Avila. God walks among the pots and pans. In other words, the divine is not waiting for us in perfect moments. He meets us in the mess. So I rolled out of bed, whispered a simple "God, be with me today," and started again. That's something this week had taught me. Sainthood isn't about intensity. It's about return, coming back, again and again and again. At breakfast, I paused to actually taste my food. I noticed the flavor, the warmth, the gift of it. I didn't rush through it. I didn't check my email while eating. I was just there, fully there. That sounds simple, but in our distracted world, it felt revolutionary. The rest of the day unfolded like any other. Work, errands, people, stress, but my posture toward it all had changed. I wasn't trying to escape the stress. I was trying to meet it with grace, and that meant changing my reactions. Not fixing others, but letting myself be changed. In one moment, standing in line at the store, I found myself behind someone who was clearly struggling. They were short on cash, fumbling with coins, visibly embarrassed. My first thought, honestly, was frustration. I had places to be. But then I heard that whisper. What would Thérèse do? What would Christ do? I took a breath. I offered to cover the difference. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even expensive. But the look on their face, surprise, gratitude, relief, hit me in a way no sermon ever had. That moment preached the gospel louder than any words. And I realized this is it. This is what the saints knew, that holiness isn't about doing grand things. It's about doing ordinary things with extraordinary love. That night, I reflected on something else I hadn't expected. I felt less anxious. Not because my problems had disappeared, but because my perspective had shifted. When I slowed down, paid attention, prayed even briefly, my mind was less reactive, my heart was less cluttered. I was grounded in something eternal, not floating through the noise. And in that stillness, I remembered what Jesus said, "My peace I give to you." Not the kind of peace the world gives, but something deeper, lasting. That's what this week was giving me, not perfection, but peace, not answers, but presence. And that presence, it was changing everything. By the seventh day, I felt something I hadn't expected. I didn't want this to end. What had started as a simple experiment, 1 week living like a saint, had become something far more personal, far more permanent. I wasn't just acting different, I was becoming different. Not in some huge, radical way, but in the smallest, deepest ways that matter most. I woke up that morning earlier than usual, not out of discipline, but desire. I wanted to be with God. Not out of obligation, but because the silence felt like home. The first thing I did wasn't scroll. It wasn't stress. It was gratitude. I sat in bed and thanked God for breath, for the sunlight spilling through the window, for the chance to try again. That, I realized, was what saints do. They start again. Not once, but every day. This final day, I decided to do something simple but deeply intentional. I planned nothing but quiet, prayer, service, and rest. I started with Mass, fully present. Not thinking about lunch, not wondering about time, just there, listening, receiving, being. And that's where something struck me. The saints didn't live extraordinary lives because they were detached from the world. They lived extraordinary lives because they were deeply in it, fully engaged, radically present. And that presence, that attentiveness, was what made them different. After Mass, I walked without my phone. I greeted neighbors. I noticed the birds, the breeze, the rhythm of footsteps. It felt like God was everywhere, not in some vague way, but personally, close, speaking in every ordinary thing. That afternoon, I visited a nearby nursing home, not because I had to, but because I had the time and the heart for it. I sat with a woman named Lorraine, who told me stories of her childhood, her late husband, her favorite hymn. I didn't preach. I didn't offer advice. I just listened. And maybe that's what sainthood really is, showing up for love. Giving your time without needing a return. Offering your ears, your presence, your full attention to someone who simply needs to be seen. By evening I felt tired, but in the best way, like after a long hike or a good cry. I sat down and journaled. This week didn't change my life. It changed how I see life, and maybe that's the same thing. I didn't want to go back to how I lived before, not because it was all bad, but because now I knew what it felt like to live awake. And that's what this week gave me. Not a checklist for sainthood, but an invitation, a rhythm, a glimpse of something so beautiful I can't unsee it. I don't need to be a canonized saint. I just need to keep choosing what they chose. Love, humility, presence, over and over again. Even in the smallest ways. Especially in the smallest ways. As night fell on the final day, I found myself sitting outside under a quiet sky. No music, no agenda, just stillness. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel restless. I didn't feel the need to do anything. I just breathed. I was present. And that felt holy. That's the word I kept returning to, holy. Not in the stained glass, incense-filled kind of way, though I love that too, but in the deeply human, deeply now kind of way. This whole week had taught me that holiness isn't found only in churches or monasteries. It's found in how you speak to your spouse, how you listen to a stranger, how you show up when you don't feel like it. I thought living like a saint would feel grand, dramatic, maybe even mystical, but instead it felt normal. Like the most natural way to live. And in a strange twist, it made everything else feel less important. The rush, the worry, the constant pressure to impress, succeed, achieve. The saints weren't chasing that, they were chasing God. And God was already with them. And now I could see He was already with me too. That shift from seeking to seeing changed how I ended the week. Instead of finishing the experiment, I simply chose to continue it, not in some official rigid way, but in small daily choices. The same way it began. I looked back on the moments that had moved me most, forgiving someone without receiving an apology, praying not for results, but for surrender, holding my tongue when gossip tempted me, listening when my ego wanted to talk, being interrupted and treating that interruption as divine. Those weren't tasks. They were thresholds, each one opening my heart just a little more. And I thought about how often we make sainthood complicated. We think it's for other people with visions, vocations, vocabs we can't match. But the truth is, holiness is possible right now. In this culture, in this country, in this life. You don't have to quit your job. You don't have to move to a cave. You just have to love intentionally, repeatedly, freely. I ended that night in prayer, not dramatic, not tearful, just quiet, honest, a whispered thanks, a promise to try again tomorrow. Because that's what saints do. They don't live perfectly. They live faithfully, 1 hour at a time. And that's what I wanted too. This week didn't give me all the answers. It didn't make me someone else, but it reminded me who I am at my best and who I'm called to be. Not perfect, just present, just willing, just real. And maybe that's how sainthood always begins. So here's what I learned from trying to live like a saint for 1 week. Sainthood is not a finish line. It's a daily decision. It's not about halos or heroic feats. It's about love in the trenches, grace in the routine, God in the ordinary. We tend to think holiness is reserved for a select few, those who levitate, see visions, or live lives so distant from our own they feel unreachable. But the saints weren't superhuman. They were painfully, beautifully human. They had doubts, bad days, and failures. But what made them different wasn't that they were perfect. It's that they never stopped seeking. They kept saying yes when it would have been easier to say no. They kept choosing love when comfort was calling. And that, more than anything, is what this week taught me. I can choose that too. I can choose patience when I'm irritated, mercy when I'm wronged, generosity when I'd rather hold back. I can choose stillness instead of distraction, presence instead of performance, prayer instead of panic. I won't get it right every time, neither did they. But sainthood doesn't begin with perfection, it begins with desire. And for the first time in a long time, I desire holiness, not as a duty but as a path to the life I've always wanted to live. A life of peace, of purpose, of joy not based on how much I achieve but on how deeply I love. So no, I'm not a saint, not yet. But I'm on the path, and so are you. If this story stirred something in you, something small like a whisper in your chest, I invite you to listen. Maybe you're not ready to overhaul your entire life. Maybe you don't even know where to begin. But here's the good news. You don't need to. You just need to take the next step. Start with prayer, with silence, with noticing, with gratitude. Start with choosing love in the next conversation, forgiveness in the next frustration, holiness in the hidden places of your day. Because sainthood doesn't live in stained glass windows. It lives in the quiet choices that no one sees, but God does. And those choices, they change everything. Subscribe to Holy Path Insight for more stories like this. Real faith, real transformation, and real hope for the modern soul. Like and share this video with someone who's hungry for something deeper. And remember, the path to sainthood isn't out of reach. It's already beneath your feet.